Hey there, I'm Jason Walker. I'm 30, but if you saw me, you might guess I'm closer to 35. I look older than I am, not because of time, but because of what I've gone through. I grew up in Cherry Hill, New Jersey, a pretty standard middle-class town. You'd see neat red brick houses with lawns so perfectly manicured it was like people's reputations depended on them. Jewish and Asian families, sometimes both, lived side by side. But behind those closed doors, Cherry Hill wasn't just quiet streets or friendly barbecues. It was a place where expectations cut like a knife. Kids weren't just raised to succeed. They were groomed to be their parents' showpieces for neighbors and friends. And from a young age, I was stuck in that invisible trap. I remember my first days learning to write. My mom, Nancy Walker, would sit right next to me, her sharp eyes, tracking every shaky line. "Jason, your handwriting needs to be neat, beautiful, no smudges," she'd say, her voice steady but heavy with pressure, as if one messy letter could bring everything crashing down. My mom was an accountant, always precise, always in charge. I think she applied that same exactness to raising me. My dad, Ronald Walker, was even more intimidating. He was a construction engineer, a tall man with a voice that rumbled like thunder. Every time he walked into the house, the atmosphere got heavier. "Jason, homework done?"
"Show it to me," he'd
say the second my backpack hit the floor. "No hello. No how was your day?" Just inspections, control, and demands. In Cherry Hill, achievement wasn't just a goal. It defined your worth. Neighbors would boast about their kids scoring 1,500 on the SAT and getting into Princeton. My mom's friends would brag about their daughter at NYU, landing a Goldman Sachs internship in her sophomore year. Those stories weren't just anecdotes. They felt like direct hits to my self-esteem. "Other kids can do it. Why can't you?" my dad would ask, looking at me like I was a failed project. I was only 8, but I already knew what it felt like to be constantly compared, measured against kids I'd never even met. My home wasn't a refuge. It was a battleground. Every day was a fight to prove I was good enough. An A was the bare minimum. An A+ was the target. If I brought home a B, my dad wouldn't hit me. He never did. But he'd give me a look of deep disappointment, as if I'd shamed the entire Walker family. "Jason, you think a B is good enough?" "I do." "You want to end up sweeping streets," he'd say, his voice cold as ice. My mom was softer, but her gentleness was like a thin blade, cutting deep. "Jason, I just want what's best for you. If you don't try hard, you'll regret it later." Regret. That word haunted my entire childhood. I didn't even know what it meant, but I feared it so much that I started hiding my true feelings. I loved drawing, spending hours by the window, sketching imaginary cars with elegant flowing lines. But every time I got caught, my mom would pull me back to the study table, piling math and science books in front of me. "Drawing won't make you money, Jason. You have to be practical," she'd say. Memories like that stuck in my mind like nails. That couldn't be pulled out. I remember once in 4th grade, I made the school basketball team. I was so thrilled, I ran home clutching the announcement letter, thinking my parents would be proud. But my dad just glanced at the paper, folded it, and set it down. "Basketball? You think you're Michael Jordan or something? Focus on your studies. Don't waste time on useless things." I stood there, the crumpled paper in my hand, feeling like my heart had been crumpled and tossed into the trash. From then on, I never mentioned basketball again. Stopped talking about anything I loved, but it wasn't all darkness. There were rare days when my dad was away on a business trip or my mom was busy with work meetings, and I was free. I'd run to the backyard, sit under the old oak tree, and let my imagination run wild. I dreamed of being a car designer, creating amazing machines, or an astronaut, flying to stars where no one could control me. Those moments were brief, but they were my oxygen. What kept me going through days of feeling trapped. In the years that followed, I learned to survive. I became a machine designed to please others. I earned grades, joined the clubs my parents wanted: debate team, math team, even though I had no interest in them. I learned to smile when compared to other kids, to nod when my mom bragged about me to her friends, even though inside I wanted to scream that I wasn't their puppet, smart, obedient, and perfect. But inside, I was a lonely boy, always afraid, always feeling like I wasn't good enough. One night, I overheard my parents talking in the kitchen, thinking I was asleep. "Jason needs to try harder," my dad said. "He's smart, but he doesn't have the fire. He's not driven enough to get into an Ivy League school." My mom sighed and replied, "I just hope he doesn't let us down." I stood outside the door, my heart tightening. I wondered, would I ever be good enough in their eyes? Would I ever be loved just for being me, not for my grades or the college I got into? My childhood had no park playdates, no warm hugs, no words of encouragement. My home wasn't a safe haven. It was a cage where I was molded into the version my parents wanted, not the person I truly was. I learned to hide my dreams, my sadness, and to live as a shadow of myself. But deep inside, there was still a tiny spark of hope that one day I'd break free. Find a place where I could be myself without fear or control. Then, at 18, I left Cherry Hill for college, a step I thought would be my escape. But I didn't realize the cage wasn't just in that red brick house. It was inside me, in the expectations my parents had etched into my mind. My journey, it turned out, was only just beginning. I got into the Wharton School at the University of Pennsylvania, majoring in economics. It wasn't my choice, but my parents. "Wharton is the pinnacle, Jason," my dad said, his voice brimming with pride, as if he'd passed the entrance exam himself. "Study there, and you'll have a future." My mom smiled, a rare moment of genuine satisfaction, and said, "You've made me so proud." That praise, though rare, felt like an invisible chain binding me to the path they'd already laid out. I didn't dare ask if I wanted to study economics. I didn't dare say I'd once dreamed of an art school where I could draw, design, and let my imagination soar. Because in my parents' world, dreaming was a luxury, and I wasn't allowed luxuries. The day I left Cherry Hill, I stood in front of our red brick house, a suitcase by my side, staring at the windows where I used to sit for hours, dreaming of a different life. My dad walked me to the car, patted my shoulder, a rare gesture, said, "Don't let us down, Jason." I nodded, as I always did, but inside I felt a void. I didn't know what I was searching for, but I hoped college would be the place where I'd find it. Wharton was a completely different world. Grand buildings, lecture halls filled with brilliant students and professors whose piercing gazes seemed to see right through you. I was overwhelmed, but not in a good way. Everyone there seemed to know exactly what they wanted. A job on Wall Street, a position at McKinsey, or at the very least, $1 million startup. In me, I just wanted to survive the endless lectures on corporate finance and data analysis. I sat in the back row, taking meticulous notes, but my mind often drifted to the car sketches I used to draw. 2 ideas of a flying car that I knew would never become reality. I excelled academically, not because I loved it, but because I'd been trained to excel. I earned A's, joined investment clubs, and even secured a summer internship at a finance firm in New York. But every time I looked in the mirror, I didn't recognize myself. The guy staring back wore a crisp dress shirt, neatly combed hair, and a forced smile. That wasn't the Jason who sat under the oak tree, dreaming of the stars. That was the Jason of my parents, of expectations, of a future I didn't choose. College. Life wasn't exactly hell, but it wasn't paradise either. I had a few friends, people I called friends because we studied or worked on group projects. But I never truly opened up to anyone. How could I when I didn't even know who I was? I was afraid that if I told the truth, that I hated economics, that I wanted to do something more creative, they'd look at me like I was some kind of weirdo. At Wharton, no one wanted to be an artist. They wanted to be CEOs. Once in my sophomore year, I secretly enrolled in a product design course at Penn's art school. It was the boldest decision I'd ever made. The class took place in the evenings in a small studio filled with the smell of paint and wood. There, I could hold a pencil, cut paper, and create small models with my hands. For the first time in years, I felt like I was truly breathing. But that joy was short-lived. One day, my mom called asking about my schedule. I slipped up and mentioned the design class, and she was furious. "Jason, Are you wasting your time? You think we're paying for you to play with crayons? I didn't respond. I just apologized, as always, and dropped the class the following week. But that night, lying in my dorm room bed, staring at the ceiling, I felt a part of myself die. Graduated with honors, as expected. On graduation day, my parents flew in from Cherry Hill, dressed impeccably, taking photos with me in front of the campus gates. They beamed, bragging to everyone that our son graduated from Wharton. I stood there in my cap and gown, a stiff smile on my face, but inside I felt empty. That diploma wasn't mine, it was theirs. Right after graduation, I landed a job at a major tech company in Silicon Valley as a data analyst. 6 figures starting. Salary, full benefits, and a bright office with glass windows overlooking the San Francisco Bay. Everyone said I was lucky. My parents called, their voices full of pride. Jason, all the hard work was worth it. But every morning as I sat in front of my computer screen, typing numbers and running statistical models, I felt like a machine. The work was dry, repetitive. With no room for creativity, no room for me. I hated it, but I didn't dare admit it, because if I did, I'd have to face the question. So, what do you want, Jason? And I had no answer. I started sending money to my parents every month. First, it was just a way to thank them, to prove I wasn't useless. They accepted the money, but rarely thanked me. Is this all you're sending? My dad once asked, half joking, half serious. The Harris's kid bought his parents a condo in Florida. I smiled as always and said, I'll try harder. But inside I wondered how much is enough. I'd done everything they wanted. I attended a top school, landed a high-paying job. So why did I still feel like a failure? Life in Silicon Valley was an endless loop. I rented a small apartment, the rent absurdly high. I worked 12-hour days, sometimes more, to finish the reports my boss demanded. I attended company parties, drank beer with colleagues, and laughed as if I belonged. But every night when I returned to my apartment, I'd sit on the couch, staring into space, feeling a growing void in my chest. I didn't know what I was living for. I didn't know who I was. There was one person who made my life less lonely. Brooke, my girlfriend. I met her at a coffee shop in Palo Alto when she dropped her cup and I helped pick it up. Brooke was different from everyone around me. She was a freelancer, a writer, and photographer, living a life unbound by expectations. Don't you get tired, Jason? She asked me once as we sat on the beach in Santa Cruz, watching the waves. Working all day, living in that box just to please others? I didn't answer, just stared out at the sea, trying to hide the pang in my heart. Brooke saw it, but she didn't push me. She just held my hand. And in that moment, I felt a little bit loved. But even Brooke couldn't fill the void inside me. I kept sending money to my parents, kept working like a machine, kept living the script they had written. I thought that if I had tried harder, earned more money, bought a bigger house, maybe my parents would see me differently. Maybe they'd say, Jason, we're proud of you. But deep down, I knew it was a pipe dream. Then everything came crashing down on a Tuesday morning. As I stepped into the office, hot coffee still in my hand, the atmosphere felt off. Colleagues whispered in corners, avoiding my eyes. I sat at my desk, opened my laptop, and saw an email from my boss. Urgent meeting 10 a.m. No explanation, no details. My heart raced, a bad feeling creeping over me. In the meeting room, the HR director stood in front of a whiteboard, her voice monotone, as if reading from a script. My company, a tech giant once valued at billions, had just been acquired by a larger competitor. We have to streamline our workforce, she said, her gaze fixed on no one. Some of you will receive notifications today. I sat there, my hands clenched under the table, feeling like the floor was collapsing beneath me. I had worked 12-hour days, sacrificed everything, my dreams, my time, myself, to keep this job. But it turned out I was just a number on there. Payroll. The notification came that afternoon in a cold email. Thank you for your contributions, Jason. Your contract will terminate in 2 weeks. No explanation, no condolences. I stared at the screen, trying to process what had just happened. Fired. The word echoed in my head like a bell. I had done everything right. Attended a top school, worked tirelessly. So why had I failed? I called Brooke that evening, my voice trembling. I lost my job, I said, trying to stay calm. She was silent for a moment, then replied, Jason, it'll be okay. You'll find another job. But I didn't want comfort. I wanted to scream, to smash something, to ask why life was so unfair. Brooke came to my apartment, hugged me, and I let her, but I felt nothing but emptiness. 2 weeks later, I left the office for the last time, carrying a cardboard box with a few personal items, a framed photo of me and Brooke, a ballpoint pen, and a company badge, now worthless. I looked back at my empty desk where I had spent 3 years of my life, had wondered what was it all for. I tried to find a new job immediately. I updated my resume, sent out dozens of applications, attended interviews, but the tech market was collapsing. Big companies were laying off staff. Startups were shutting down left and right. Each rejection made me feel smaller.
We're sorry.
But you're not a good fit, one recruiter said over Zoom, her polite smile cutting like a knife. I started losing sleep, lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, wondering what my parents would think if they knew I was unemployed. My savings began to dwindle. But I didn't dare tell my parents. I still sent money home each month, though the amounts grew smaller. Why so little this month, Jason? My dad asked over the phone, his tone suspicious. Is work okay? I lied, my voice steady. Everything's fine, Dad. It's just expensive here. I couldn't let them know the truth. Couldn't bear to hear them say I told you to try harder. Then I made a huge mistake. An old friend from Wharton, Tom, contacted me, inviting me to invest in a tech startup he called a golden opportunity. This is the future, Jason, Tom said, his eyes gleaming over Zoom. Put in $50,000 and you'll make 10 times that in 2 years. I hesitated, but Tom pressed on. You don't want to be left behind, do you? I looked at my savings, all I had left after 3 years of work, and thought, if I succeed, my parents will see me differently. I wired the money, hoping this was my chance to prove I wasn't worthless. 6 months later, the startup went bankrupt. Tom vanished, ignoring my messages, nearly my entire savings. I sat in my apartment, staring at a pile of unpaid rent bills, feeling like the world was crushing my chest. I could no longer afford rent. My lease was expiring, and the landlord refused to renew unless I paid 3 months up front. In the end, I had no choice. I had to return to Cherry Hill, to the red brick house I had sworn I'd never go back to. I called my mom, my voice choking. Mom, can I come home for a while? She was silent for a moment, then replied, Come back, but don't. Expect us to support you forever. I nodded. Though she couldn't see, and a wave of humiliation crashed over me. I was 27 years old, a Wharton graduate, once had a high-paying job, and now I was a failure, returning home empty-handed. The day I returned to Cherry Hill, it was pouring rain. I stood at the front door, my suitcase soaked, my finger hesitating over the doorbell. When my mom opened the door, she looked at me, her eyes devoid of warmth. Come in, she said, her voice cold. My dad was in the living room watching the news, not bothering to look up. I dragged my suitcase inside, water dripping onto the hardwood floor, feeling like I was dragging my failure along with it. My old room was exactly the same, like a museum of my childhood. Single bed, the desk, and the medals hanging on the wall, proof of a Jason who once made my parents proud. But now they only made me feel more pathetic. I sat on the bed, looking out the window at the old oak tree still standing there, and wondered, how did I end up like this? The first few days, my parents didn't say much. They let me stay, but their silence was more terrifying than any scolding. I could feel their disappointment in every glance, every sigh. Dinners were torture. What did you do today, Jason? Dad would ask, his voice dripping with sarcasm. Play video games, I'd reply, trying to stay calm. I've been applying for jobs. But he'd just smirk. Applying for jobs? You went to Wharton to end up unemployed? I knew you didn't have what it takes. My mom was more subtle, but her words cut just as deep. Jason, "I never thought you'd let things get this far," she said once, as I helped her wash dishes. "I thought you'd achieve more." I gripped the sponge tightly, soapy water spilling over my hands, and said nothing. How could I explain that? I tried my hardest, that I'd lived my whole life to please them, only to lose everything. I kept searching for jobs, spending hours at the computer, applying to every company I could find. I took on freelance work, writing reports, analyzing data, but the income was inconsistent, not enough to rent a new place. Each rejection email made me feel smaller. "You planning to live like this forever?" my dad asked one night at dinner. As I sat with my head bowed, "You're embarrassing me in front of the neighbors." I swallowed a bite of food, though it stuck in my throat and didn't respond. I knew if I opened my mouth, I'd either scream or worse, cry. Brooke still called, trying to comfort me. "You're stronger than you think, Jason," she said. "You'll get through this with time." But the distance between us grew. She was still in California pursuing her passion for writing, while I was stuck in Cherry Hill in a house full of nightmares. Slowly, the calls became less frequent. I didn't blame her. Who would want to be with someone like me, a jobless guy, living off his parents with no future? The humiliation peaked one evening when my parents invited a few neighbors over for dinner. I tried to stay out of sight, but my mom called me downstairs. "Jason, come say hello to everyone," she said, her tone commanding. I walked down wearing an old t-shirt, forcing a smile. "Mr. Harris." Our neighbor looked at me and asked, "Jason, I heard you lost your job. What are you doing now?" Before I could answer, my dad cut in, chuckling derisively. "He's not doing anything. Just sitting in his room, mooching off us." The table laughed as if it were a harmless joke. I stood there, my face burning, my hands clenched. I wanted to scream to tell them I was trying, that I didn't want this, but I just bowed my head, muttered an apology, and went back to my room. That night I sat on my bed looking out at the oak tree and wondered, would I ever escape this place? I lived like a shadow in my own home, each day passing in shame and loneliness. I was no longer the Jason of Wharton, of Silicon Valley. Was a failure, a 27-year-old man with nothing but shattered dreams. But deep inside, a small flame still flickered, a spark of hope that one day I'd stand up, that I'd prove I wasn't the worthless person my parents thought I was. Thanksgiving that year arrived in the biting cold of November, with winds in Cherry Hill swirling golden leaves across the streets. The red brick house was spotless, meticulously cleaned by my mom, the aroma of roasted turkey and pumpkin pie filling the kitchen. My parents decided to host a small gathering, inviting a few relatives and neighbors. Mr. Harris, Aunt Susan, and a family new to the neighborhood. I didn't want to attend. Thought of sitting among scrutinizing eyes, fielding questions about my job and future, made me want to hide in my room. But my mom gave me no choice. "Jason, it's Thanksgiving," she said, her voice firm. "To come down, don't embarrass us." I nodded, as I always did, but inside a storm was brewing. I had been living in this house for nearly 6 months, enduring snide remarks and contemptuous glances. I told myself I could handle one more evening, just one more. But I had no idea that night would change everything. To prepare, I decided, to do something, anything, to prove I wasn't worthless. I had no money, no job, but I still had my heart. In the week leading up to Thanksgiving, I worked on a gift for my parents. I dug through old photos in the closet family pictures from when I was young, a trip to the beach in Atlantic City, a picnic in the park, and a rare moment when my dad smiled as I gave him a handmade car model. I printed them out, carefully pasted them into a small album, and decorated it with simple sketches. On the first page, I wrote a note. "Thank you for raising me. I promise to do better." I didn't know if they'd appreciate it, but I hoped just a little, that they'd see I was trying. On Thanksgiving night, I wore an old but clean dress shirt, stood in front of the mirror, and tried to force a smile. "You can do this, Jason," I told myself, but the voice in my head trembled. As I walked downstairs, the lively chatter from the dining room mingled with the warm smell of food. The table was beautifully set with golden brown turkey, mashed potatoes, and wine glasses glinting under the chandelier. My dad sat at the head of the table. My mom busied herself arranging plates, and the guests were chatting cheerfully. I quietly took my seat at the end of the table, trying to make myself invisible. The meal started smoothly, at least for the first few minutes. Mr. Harris talked about his son buying a condo in Florida. Aunt Susan bragged about her granddaughter getting into Harvard. I kept my head down, focusing on my mashed potatoes, trying not to let their stories get to me. But then, like a ticking time bomb, my dad spoke up. "Jason," he called, his voice low, but loud enough to silence the table. "It's Thanksgiving. Do you have anything to share about your job or your future?" All eyes turned to me. My throat went dry, my hand gripping the fork tightly. I'm looking for work," I said, my voice soft but clear. "I'm also doing some freelance projects, and I hope to get settled soon." I thought it was a safe answer, but my dad laughed. A sharp, cutting laugh. "Looking for work? 6 months, and you're still looking? How long are you going to mooch off us, Jason?" The table went silent. No one dared look at me. My mom lowered her head as if she didn't want to intervene. Mr. Harris cleared his throat, trying to break the tension, but my dad didn't stop. "You went to Wharton, cost us a fortune, and now you sit here doing nothing. I'm ashamed to tell people you're my son." I felt the blood rush to my face, but I held myself. Together? I had heard these words hundreds of times, in the kitchen, in the living room, every single day. I told myself I could endure it. But then I remembered the album under my chair, the gift I had made with all my sincerity. I thought maybe this was the moment to change things. I stood up, hands trembling, pulled out the album, and placed it in front of my parents. "I made this," I said, my voice choking. "It's for you. I know I haven't done anything great yet, but I wanted to thank you." My mom looked at the album, a flicker of surprise in her eyes. She opened it, flipped through a few pages, but my dad only glanced at it before pushing it aside like it was trash. "What's this?" "Jason," he said, his voice icy. "Some old photos? You think this will make me proud?" I stood there, my heart pounding, waiting for something. A thank you, a nod, anything. But then my dad looked at me, his eyes sharp as knives, and said, "You know what the best gift would be if you disappeared from this house?" Time seemed to stop. Those words hit me like a sledgehammer to the chest. The table was deathly silent. No one dared breathe. My mom clutched her napkin, head bowed, but she said nothing. Mr. Harris looked away. Aunt Susan pretended to sip her water. I stood there in front of everyone, feeling exposed. My failure laid bare for the world to see. Humiliation, pain, and anger surged within me, but I couldn't say a word. I just looked at my dad, his eyes showing no remorse, as if he had stated an obvious truth. I turned and walked out of the dining room, my legs heavy as lead. I heard my mom call softly, "Jason," but I didn't stop. I went to my room, grabbed my old backpack, and stuffed it with a few clothes and my laptop. Outside, snow began to fall, white flakes blanketing the streets of Cherry Hill. I stepped out of the house, not looking back, the door closing behind me with a dry click. No one followed. No one stopped me. I stood in the freezing snow, my breath forming clouds, feeling like the entire world had turned its back on me. I didn't know where I was going. I had no money, no job, no place to stay. But in that moment, I knew one thing for certain. I would never return to this house. Never let my parents or anyone make me feel worthless again. The small flame inside me, the one I thought had gone out, flared brighter than ever. I gripped the straps of my backpack and walked into the snowy night, unsure of what the future held, but certain that I had to live not for my parents but for myself. The snow fell harder, blanketing the road leading out of Cherry Hill. My old sneakers were soaked, each step feeling heavier than the last. I had no plan, no destination, only one thought. I had to get away from this place. I stopped at a bus stop, its plastic shelter yellowed with age, seeking a bit of warmth under the dim streetlight. My pockets held only a few coins, not enough to get far, and my phone was nearly dead. I sat on the icy bench, my breath forming clouds, and for the first time in months, I let myself think, really think, about what I wanted. Then, like a spark, In the darkness, I remembered my grandfather, Albert Walker. He lived in Burlington, Vermont, a small town I had visited only a few times as a child. My memories of him were faint but warm. Him sitting in his garage, hands stained with motor oil, fixing old cars with a kind smile. He used to tell me stories about the Ford Mustangs he worked on in his youth, as if they were old friends. My parents rarely mentioned him, dismissing him as that old mechanic with a sneer. "He has nothing to teach you," my dad once said. But now, with nothing left to lose, he was the only person I wanted to find. I didn't have his phone number or any way to contact him. All I could recall was a dirt road leading to a wooden house, a small field behind it, and an old sign reading Walker's Garage. I wasn't sure I could find him, but I had to try. The journey to Burlington was a blur of cheap bus rides and dozing off on plastic seats. I used the last of my money borrowing. A little more from an old Wharton friend, promising to pay it back. When the final bus stopped in Burlington, the sky was brightening, soft sunlight filtering through vibrant red autumn trees. I stepped off, my backpack heavy on my shoulders, realizing I had no idea where to go. Burlington was small, but to someone like me, it felt like a maze. I asked a newspaper vendor at a street corner, "Do you know Albert Walker's Garage?" The man frowned, then pointed toward the outskirts. "Take the main road straight, turn left at the bridge, then keep going. You'll see a wooden house with an old sign. It's not hard to find." I walked, my legs aching, my stomach growling with hunger. The dirt road appeared after nearly an hour, just as I remembered, dusty, flanked by withered cornfields. Then I saw it, a small wooden house with a weathered shingle roof, a garage wide open with an old pickup truck parked inside. The Walker's Garage sign hung crookedly, its letters nearly faded. My heart raced, a mix of relief and fear. I approached and knocked on the door, my hands trembling. An elderly man opened the door, his hair white, wearing a worn sweater. Looked at me, his eyes searching, no hint of recognition. "Who are you?" he asked, his voice deep, but not harsh. I stood there, caught off guard, realizing it had been over 15 years since he last saw me. I was no longer the scrawny kid he knew, but a tired, unshaven, 27-year-old man. "Grandpa, it's me, Jason," I said, my voice catching. "Jason Walker, Ronald's son." He squinted, studying me closely as if piecing together fragments of memory. Then his eyes lit up, a slow smile spreading across his wrinkled face. "Jason, my God, you've grown so much." He stepped forward, wrapping me in a tight hug, his warmth melting the cold inside me. I hugged him back, tears welling up, but I held. "Them in. Come in." "It's freezing out there," he said, pulling me inside. His house was simple, filled with the scent of coffee and burning wood from the fireplace. The furniture was old, the walls adorned with a few black and white photos. One of them showing me at 5 years old, standing next to him in the garage, holding a wrench too big for my hands. He brewed coffee, set a plate of cookies in front of me, and sat down across from me. "What are you doing here, Jason?" he asked, his voice gentle but full of concern. "What's going on with your parents?" I looked down, unsure where to begin, but his eyes, free of judgment or pressure, made me open up. I told him everything, about my controlled childhood, the job I lost, the humiliating months in Cherry Hill, and the stinging words at Thanksgiving. He listened, his hands gripping his coffee mug, never interrupting. When I finished, he sighed. "Jason, I know Ronald's a tough man, but you don't deserve to be treated like that. Don't worry, my home is always open to you." His words were like a warm blanket wrapping around me after months of coldness. He showed me to a small upstairs room with a window overlooking the field. "Rest up today," he said. "Tomorrow come to the garage and help me with some chores to take your mind off things." I nodded, lying down on the creaky old bed. That night, for the first time in months, I slept without nightmares. The first days in Burlington, I was like a bird with broken wings, slowly learning to fly again. Grandpa didn't push me to talk or ask about my future. Just pulled me into the garage each morning, handing me a wrench or a screwdriver. "This car's battery is shot," he'd say, then patiently show me how to fix it. I knew nothing about cars, But working with my hands, feeling each bolt and part, made me feel alive again. The hours in the garage, hands stained with oil, were the first time I felt I was doing something meaningful, not to please anyone else. One afternoon, as we sat, with coffee during a break, he looked at me, his eyes deep and knowing. "Are you running away or searching for something, Jason?" he asked. The question stunned me. I didn't know how to answer, but he didn't press. He just patted my shoulder. "Whatever it is, you'll find it, but don't live for others. Live for you." Those words were like a gust of wind, clearing the fog in my mind. I started gardening with him, watering plants, pulling weeds, feeling the soil under my hands. Those simple tasks healed me little by little. I no longer woke up suffocating. I began to smile, even if just small ones. In Burlington, I found a safe place where I wasn't judged or compared. I found myself, even if only in fragments. I didn't know what the future held. But with Grandpa by my side, I knew I could face it. The flame inside me, the one I thought had died that Thanksgiving night, now burned brightly. I decided I would no longer chase expectations. I would live my own life. Burlington was where I started over, like a soldier returning from battle, scarred but yearning to heal. Spent my time in my grandfather's garage, fixing cars, tending the garden, keeping my hands busy and my mind at rest. But each night, I returned to a buried dream: design. I had once loved sketching cars and imaginary products, but my parents had snuffed out that spark. Now in the small room overlooking Burlington's fields, I resolved not to let them or anyone steal my passion again. I enrolled in an online product design course, the kind I had secretly taken in college before my mom forced me to quit. Lectures on CAD software and turning ideas into 3D models made me feel alive again. I spent hours sketching on my laptop, from simple keychains to modern pen holders, but I knew design alone wasn't enough. To make my dream real, I needed more skills. So I dove into learning basic programming, HTML, CSS, and how to build a website. I read books, watched videos, and wrestled with lines of code like a complete novice. Some nights I wanted to give up, my screen full of errors, my head buzzing with exhaustion. But then I'd look out at the field, remembering my grandfather's words, "You can do it, Jason." And I kept going. Grandpa was the one who kept my fire burning. He didn't have much money, but he had boundless faith. One afternoon, when I shared my idea of starting an online store, he nodded, his eyes lighting up. "It sounds good, but you'll need some capital to start. I'll help." He rummaged through a drawer and pulled out an envelope. Inside was $500, the meager savings of an old mechanic. "This is all I've got," he said, handing it to me. "But I believe you'll make something of it." My hands trembled as I took the money, promising to pay him back. He just smiled and waved it off like it was nothing. With that $500, I built Walker's Craft, an online store selling products I designed myself. I started small, with keychains, shaped like cars, t-shirts with unique patterns, and a few handmade decorative items. I taught myself e-commerce, from optimizing the website to running social media ads. The first few weeks, no one bought anything. I checked the site hourly, my heart pounding, hoping for a single order. Then one day the first order came, a keychain purchased by a customer in Vermont. I shouted in my room, ran to the garage to tell Grandpa. He laughed heartily, patting my shoulder. "See, you're off to a start." Word about me reached Brooke, my girlfriend, with whom I had nearly lost touch during those humiliating months in Cherry Hill. I hadn't called her since that Thanksgiving night, believing she deserved better than a failure like me. But one day, as I was packing an order in the garage, a car pulled up to Grandpa's house. Brooke stepped out, her hair tied high, her smile as radiant as sunlight. "Jason, you think you can hide from me forever?" she said, her tone half teasing, half annoyed. I was stunned, unsure how to respond. She explained that after learning I'd left Cherry Hill, she had asked around to find me. "I quit my job in California," she said. "I want to be here with you, helping you build this dream." I couldn't believe it. Brooke, who had lived freely with her writing and photography, was willing to leave it all behind for Burlington, a place with nothing but fields and an old garage. She moved in, living with me and Grandpa in the small wooden house. The three of us became an odd but warm family. Brooke helped manage the store, taking product photos and writing descriptions with her poetic flair. As orders grew, she stayed. Up late with me packing boxes, laughing when we mislabeled packages or spilled coffee on the table. Those moments, however small, were true happiness. Something I had never felt in Silicon Valley or Cherry Hill. The store began to grow. From a few sporadic orders, I landed bigger contracts, designing logos for local businesses, producing souvenirs for Burlington events. I rented a small workshop near Grandpa's house, bought a 3D printer, and started producing in larger quantities. Some days I worked to exhaustion, but every time I saw my products in customers' hands, I knew I was on the right path. Brooke was there, always reminding me to rest, always believing I could do more. Grandpa watched from the garage, his eyes filled with pride. "You're like me when I was young," he said, "but you're better." Within 2 years, Walker's Craft became a fast-growing online product design company. Revenue climbed steadily enough to repay Grandpa, build savings, and even buy an old truck for deliveries. I didn't contact my parents, though. They called a few times and left messages. The humiliation from Thanksgiving lingered like an unhealed scar. I didn't hate them, but I knew I needed distance to protect myself. One autumn day, when Burlington's leaves blazed red, I knelt before Brooke in the field behind Grandpa's house and proposed with a simple ring, one of my first designs. She cried, hugged me, and said yes before I could finish. We had a small wedding in Burlington in Grandpa's garden with him, Brooke's family, and a few friendly neighbors as witnesses. Grandpa, in his old suit, stood by my side, his eyes glistening. "You've done well, Jason," he said, his voice choking. I didn't tell my parents. This was my day, Brooke's, Grandpa's, not theirs. A few months later, Brooke told me she was pregnant with a boy. I sat frozen, my hands trembling as I held the pregnancy test, feeling like the world was opening up before me. I looked at Grandpa, soon to be a great-grandfather, and Brooke, who had walked with me through the darkness. I knew that no matter how painful the past had been, I had found my true family. I had built a life I was proud of, not for anyone else's expectations, but because it was mine. Life in Burlington unfolded like a gentle dream, though not without its challenges. Walker's Craft grew steadily, with orders pouring in from across the U.S. and even Canada. From car-themed t-shirts to small furniture pieces I designed, I hired 3 employees, expanded the workshop, and even began partnering with a Boston company to supply souvenirs for large events. Brooke managed finances and marketing, keeping everything running smoothly, even as she navigated her 5th month of pregnancy. Grandpa, now in his 70s, still visited the workshop weekly, sitting in his old chair watching me with a proud smile. "You remind me of myself when I was young," he said, his voice warm. But amid the happy days, the past lingered like a shadow. I hadn't contacted my parents since that Thanksgiving night 3 years ago, when I left Cherry Hill in the freezing snow. Their occasional messages, brief, perfunctory check-ins with no apologies, went unanswered. I didn't hate them, but the scars from their humiliating words remained deep and painful whenever I recalled them. I thought I had closed that chapter, that Cherry Hill was just a faded memory. But fate, like a cruel director, had other plans. One morning, as I checked my emails, a subject line from an old friend in Cherry Hill stopped me cold. "Your parents' house is for sale." My heart raced as I opened the message. The friend, a real estate agent, wrote that my parents were in financial trouble. My dad had lost his job after a failed construction project, and my mom had to retire early due to health issues, racking up overwhelming medical bills. They were selling the red brick house, the place where I grew up, filled with painful memories, to pay off debts. "Thought you should know," the friend wrote. "I can send more details if you're interested." I sat there, staring at the screen, emotions swirling. Part of me wanted to brush it off, to let my parents face the consequences of their actions. But another part, a part I didn't want to admit, saw an opportunity not for revenge, but to close the past on my terms. I called my friend, asking for the details. Over the next few days, I received the file. The house was listed below market value because my parents needed cash urgently. Photos of the house, the lawns still neat, the windows still gleaming, tugged at my heart. It wasn't a home to me, but it was the place that shaped me, however harshly. That evening, I talked to Brooke as we sat by the fireplace. Thinking about buying my parents' house, I said, my voice low. She looked at me, her eyes a mix of surprise and concern. Jason, I know that house means something to you, but why? Do you want to go back? I shook my head, struggling to find the words. Not to go back. I want to take control of it. I want to prove I'm not the failure they thought I was, and I want them to know it. Brooke took my hand, her pregnant belly round and beautiful in the firelight. If this is what you need to close that chapter, I support you, but do it for you, not for them. I nodded, grateful for her understanding, even when I didn't fully understand myself. I contacted the real estate friend, asking him to represent my company, Walker's Craft LLC, to buy the house. I wanted the process to be discreet, so my parents wouldn't know I was the buyer. They didn't need to know, not yet. The purchase went through quickly. With the company's revenue and my savings, I could pay in cash, something I never imagined possible 3 years ago. The red brick house, a symbol of control and pain, now belonged to me. But I had no intention of living there. I wasn't sure what I'd do with it, only that this time, I was the one in charge. My parents had no idea that the buyer of their house was my company, that the son they'd once driven away was the one saving them from debt. I felt a cold satisfaction, but also a hint of emptiness. I wondered, would this truly help me close the past, or was I just prolonging the pain? Thanksgiving that year marked 3 years since the night I left Cherry Hill. Brooke, now 7 months pregnant, urged me to stay in Burlington to enjoy the holiday with Grandpa and our neighbors. We have a family here, Jason, she said, rubbing her belly, but I knew I couldn't avoid it forever. I needed to face my parents, not to apologize or reconcile, but to put an end to the years they made me feel worthless. I decided to return to Cherry Hill on Thanksgiving Day to give them a gift, one I had been preparing for a long time. I drove the old pickup truck, wearing a simple sweater, without warning them. The road to Cherry Hill was long and familiar, each mile like a reel of my childhood. Endless nights studying to exhaustion, biting remarks, dreams crushed. When the red brick house came into view, my heart pounded. The lawn was no longer neat. The windows clouded with dust. Signs of decline. I took a deep breath, clutching a small, carefully wrapped wooden box, and knocked on the door. My mom opened it, her eyes wide with shock. Jason? She gasped, her voice trembling. She looked older, her hair grayer, her face gaunt. What are you doing here? I gave a faint smile, keeping my emotions in check. I came for Thanksgiving. Mom, I have a gift for you and Dad. She hesitated, then invited me in, her voice awkward. Come in. The dining room was the same, but it lacked the warmth of 3 years ago. The table held only a few simple dishes, no turkey, no wine. My dad sat at the head, thinner than I remembered, his eyes weary. When he saw me, he froze, then smirked. So, you still remember the way back? I thought you'd vanished for good. His words, as always, cut like a knife. But this time, I didn't lower my head. I sat down, placing the gift box in front of me. I just wanted to wish you a happy Thanksgiving, I said, my voice calm. The meal began in intense silence. My mom tried asking about my life, but my dad interrupted. What are you doing now, Jason? Still unemployed? Or mooching off someone else? He laughed as if it were a joke. I looked at him, unfazed, and smiled. I'm doing fine, Dad. I have a job, a family. Came here to thank you both for teaching me how to be strong. My dad frowned, clearly skeptical. You a family? Don't tell me you married that California girl and you're living off her? I didn't respond, just slid the gift box toward him. Open it, Dad. It's my gift to you. My mom looked at me, her eyes nervous, but she stayed silent. My dad shrugged, opening the box, expecting something meaningless, like the album from 3 years ago. Inside were 2 documents, the purchase agreement for the house under Walker's Craft LLC, and a notice requiring them to vacate within 30 Dazed, my dad skimmed it, then froze, his face paling. My mom snatched the papers, her hands shaking. "Jason, what is this?" she asked, her voice breaking. I stood looking them in the eyes. "From now on, this house belongs to me. I bought it." Silence engulfed the room. My dad's gaze shifted from contempt to shock, then rage. "You? ... You dare?" he roared, slamming his hand on the table. "Who do you think you are, kicking me out of my own house?" I didn't flinch. "It's not your house anymore, and I'm not kicking you out. I'm just doing what you asked 3 years ago, disappearing from this house. Now it's your turn." My mom burst into tears, covering her face. "Jason, how could you do this to us? We're family." I looked at her, a pang in my heart, but I didn't back down. "Family doesn't humiliate each other, Mom. Family doesn't make you feel worthless. I found my real family, and it's not here." I turned, walked to the door, leaving them in the cold dining room. My dad shouted something behind me, but I didn't listen. I stepped outside, snow beginning to fall, and felt like a weight had been lifted from my chest. Snow fell lightly on my shoulders as I stepped out of the red brick house. Each flake a reminder that I was leaving the past behind. I climbed into the old pickup truck, started the engine, and drove into the night. The streets of Cherry Hill blurred under the streetlights, but this time I didn't feel suffocated. I was no longer the trembling boy crushed by my parents' expectations, nor the 25-year-old humiliated in the home where he grew up. I was Jason Walker, a man who had rebuilt his life from ashes, and now I was free. A few days after Thanksgiving, I got a call from my mom. Her voice trembled over the phone, mixed with sobs. "Jason, you can't do this. This is our home, all we have. Please let us stay." I sat in my Burlington workshop looking at the sketches on my desk and took a deep breath. Part of me, the part that still remembered my mom cooking for me, the rare times my dad patted my shoulder, wanted to give. But then I recalled that Thanksgiving night 3 years ago. My dad's words, "The best gift would be if you disappeared from this house." I gripped the phone, my voice calm but firm. "Mom, I gave you and Dad a chance. I did exactly what Dad asked. Now it's up to you to figure things out." I hung up, not waiting for her response. Later, my dad called, his voice a mix of anger and desperation. "You ungrateful brat. You think you're so great buying my house to kick me out?" I didn't engage with his venom, simply said, "You have 30 days to leave. That's all I'll say." Then I hung up, my heart pounding, but not from fear. For the first time, I stood up to my dad without bowing or apologizing. Over the next 30 days, my parents sent messages, some pleading, some berating, but I didn't respond. I left the paperwork to the real estate agent, instructing him to ensure they vacated on time. When the final day came, I received an email. Confirmation. My parents had moved out, taking their belongings to a rented apartment in the suburbs. The red brick house stood empty, now mine, or rather my company's. I didn't go back to check. I didn't need to see it. That house, with all its painful memories, was now just an asset on paper. I didn't plan to live there, demolish it, or sell it. I just wanted it to stand as proof that I had taken control of my life. Back in Burlington, I returned to the life I had built from nothing. Walker's craft kept growing, with orders coming from across the U.S. and even Canada. I expanded the workshop, hired more employees, and started designing larger products. Tables, bookshelves, even a line of minimalist electric bikes I sketched myself. Each product was a piece of the dream I had once buried, now alive and vibrant. Brooke, with her growing belly, was my greatest source of strength. She wasn't just my wife, but my partner, my friend, always reminding me I was worth more than my parents' insults. When she was tired from pregnancy, I insisted she rest, taking on both packing orders and answering customer emails. "You can't do everything, Jason," she teased, but her eyes shone with pride. Grandpa was there too, despite his age, visiting the workshop, sitting in his old chair, sharing stories of fixing cars and encouraging me. "You're my pride," he said, and I knew he meant it. When Brooke gave birth to our son, named Albert after Grandpa, I felt my life become whole. Holding little Albert in my arms, looking into his clear eyes, I vowed he would never feel worthless. I wouldn't compare him, pressure him, or mold him into a version I wanted. I would let Albert be himself, the way Grandpa had done for me. I didn't seek revenge on my parents with hatred. I didn't need to yell in their faces or prove myself with bitter words. My revenge was silent success, a thriving company, a happy family, a life I was proud of. My parents might call me ungrateful, might tell neighbors I was a terrible son, but I didn't care. I had learned that my worth wasn't in their words, but in what I built, the people I loved, and the person I had become. One evening, as I sat, with Brooke and Albert in Grandpa's wooden house, the fireplace flickering, I reflected on my journey. From the controlled boy in Cherry Hill to the defeated young man driven from home to a man with his own family and career, I used to think happiness was pleasing my parents, earning A's, attending a top school, making lots of money. New happiness was living true to myself, being loved and loving without conditions. To anyone feeling trapped, weighed down by others' expectations, be strong. Don't let anyone define your worth. Don't fear failure, because sometimes failure is the door to your true self. I walked through darkness, endured insults, but I stood up not to prove anything to anyone, but to live for myself. And if I could do it, you can too. I looked at Brooke, cradling a sleeping Albert, and Grandpa, telling a story about an old Mustang. I smiled, feeling light and at peace. My life wasn't perfect, but it was mine, and that was the greatest gift I could give myself.